My name is Samuel, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 38, working as a marketing manager for a fast-growing tech company in San Diego. My wife, Emily, 34, was an analyst at a major e-commerce firm, and together we had built a life that others probably envied. We had a beautiful home in the quiet suburbs, a cute little car parked in the driveway, and our pride and joy, Chloe, our 7-month-old daughter, who had just begun to show signs of her lively, curious personality. Every day, I would wake up early to get ready for work, and Emily would do the same, our routine almost robotic but comfortable. After work, we'd come home to our little girl, and life felt like a cycle of simple, perfect happiness. I'd pick Chloe up from her crib after she woke from her afternoon nap, her wide eyes staring at me with a trust only a child could offer. Emily would smile at us from the kitchen, her presence a soothing constant in our home. The weekends were spent with family, barbecues, and quiet evenings at the park. Our life felt full. But then, everything started to shift. It began subtly at first. Emily was always glued to her phone. It wasn't unusual for her to check her messages during dinner, but recently, I'd noticed she smiled at her screen in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't the normal smile of sharing a funny meme with friends. It was different, more secretive, almost like she was enjoying something that didn't involve me. At first, I brushed it off. Emily had been home on maternity leave for the last 6 months, so I thought she was just reconnecting with old work friends. It made sense, right? She was getting ready to go back to her job, after all. So I gave her space, thinking that maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, I trusted Emily. But trust can be fragile. Over the next few weeks, Emily's behavior became more erratic. She started disappearing for long stretches, telling me she was meeting coworkers for lunch or to catch up on work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I began to notice that she would leave her phone unlocked, and I'd catch a glimpse of the messages that always seemed to be between her and him. His name was James, a colleague she mentioned once or twice but never in a way that caught my attention. At least, not until now. It was on a Tuesday afternoon in March when everything came to a head. I had scheduled a lunch with Ryan, my old college friend, at our usual spot in downtown. We hadn't caught up in a while, so I looked forward to a break from the office. Ryan was an architect, outgoing and blunt, the complete opposite of me. But that's why we worked so well as friends. When Ryan arrived at the restaurant, I immediately noticed something was off. He didn't smile like usual. He fidgeted with his napkin and stared at his plate, pushing his food around without eating. I raised an eyebrow. "Dude, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep things light. But his serious expression only deepened my concern. Ryan sighed deeply, putting his fork down and finally looking at me. "Samuel, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically somber. "And you're not going to like it." My stomach dropped. The tone of his voice sent an instant wave of dread through me. My heart raced as I searched his face for answers. "What happened?" I asked, my voice thick with worry. Ryan took out his phone and, after a brief hesitation, turned the screen toward me. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the image. It was a photo of Emily, sitting in a fancy restaurant, one of the best in the city. She was smiling, leaning forward, and next to her was a man I had never seen before. His hand rested on hers in a way that felt all too intimate. A cold chill washed over me as I stared at the screen, the photo becoming sharper with every second. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I could feel the anger rising in my chest. Ryan took a deep breath, looking uncomfortable. "My cousin Carla works as a hostess at that place. She sent me this photo last night. She's seen Emily there with him a few times. Always at lunch, always in that same spot." I could feel my hand shaking as I grabbed Ryan's phone and zoomed in on the image. The timestamp was clear, 2 days ago, Thursday, 1:20 p.m. I remembered that day. Emily had told me she was meeting old work friends, catching up before returning to the office. I had stayed home, working remotely, taking care of Chloe, preparing bottles, and changing diapers. Meanwhile, Emily had been there with him. "Who is this guy?" I asked, my voice now hoarse with disbelief. Ryan shook his head. "Carla doesn't know his name. She just knows he always pays with a corporate card. Looks like he works at Emily's company." I couldn't breathe. The nausea swirled in my gut as everything I had trusted, everything I thought I knew, began to crumble. I threw enough cash on the table to cover both our meals, not bothering to say much more. Sorry, Ryan. I have to go. Ryan grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Samuel, think about this. Maybe it's not what you think. But I didn't listen. My mind was already racing as I walked out of the restaurant. What was I supposed to do with this? What had I just seen? I barely remembered the drive home. My thoughts were a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was quiet when I got there, except for the soft sound of the TV from the living room. Emily was sitting on the couch, Chloe asleep next to her in the stroller. She looked up, surprised when I walked in. "What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly caught off guard. "I thought you had meetings until 5. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, staring at her. This woman, the one I had married, the one I had a child with, was she the same person in that photo? I pulled out my phone and opened the photo. Without a word, I dropped it onto the coffee table. Emily's face turned pale as she saw the image. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. "Why don't you tell me who he is?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Emily's mouth opened, then closed, and then she tried to explain. "I can explain, Samuel," she started, but I already knew there was no way to undo the damage. The trust, the love, the life we built together, it was all slipping through my fingers. I had to know the truth. And now, I would get it. The silence in the room was suffocating as Emily stared at the phone in her hands. I could see her struggling, trying to form words that might repair the damage, but there was no saving this moment. Not anymore. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made sense. How could this have happened? How could Emily, the woman I married, the mother of my child, betray me like this? "Samuel, I swear, nothing happened," Emily said, her voice breaking. "He's just a co-worker. We've had lunch a few times, but it's nothing more than that." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped my mouth. "A co-worker? You sit with him, alone, in a fancy restaurant. Your hands are on his. How is that just lunch?" Emily's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. I didn't mean for it to look like that. I never wanted to hurt you." She stood up, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "I'm sorry, Samuel. I felt so alone. You were so focused on Chloe and everything at home, I felt invisible." Her words felt like a slap to the face. She was sorry for what happened, but how could she explain that it was just lunch? No, it wasn't just lunch. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind. "You were so focused on being a father," she continued, her voice growing more frantic. "And I just wanted to feel seen. James made me feel like I mattered again." A wave of anger surged through me. "You think that's an excuse? I'm here, working hard every day to provide for our family. I'm taking care of our daughter, doing everything I can. And you're sneaking off to lunch with another man. You lied to me, Emily." She was sobbing now, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't cheat on you. Nothing happened between us. I swear." "Yet," I interjected, my voice cold and controlled. "You said yet. That means you were thinking about it. You were considering it." Her face contorted with guilt. "Samuel, no, I never wanted to hurt you. It wasn't like that. We never crossed that line." But I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't listen to her excuses. How could I ever trust her again? How could I look at her the same way when I knew that, behind my back, she had been building this connection with another man? "How many times did you lie to me, Emily?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "How many times did you kiss me, hold our daughter, and then go meet him?" She collapsed back onto the couch, her hands buried in her face, sobbing uncontrollably. I could see her guilt, her regret, but it didn't matter. It was too late for apologies now. "You know," I said, taking a step back, "I've been working my ass off for this family. I've been here for you and Chloe every single day. And what do I get in return? You sneaking around, lying to me about where you are. This isn't just about lunch, Emily. This is about trust. And you've destroyed that." I grabbed my car keys. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. I'm going to my mom's for a few days. I need to think. Please, she cried, standing up and grabbing my arm. Don't take Chloe. Don't do this. I paused for a moment, looking at my daughter, who was peacefully asleep in her stroller. The sight of her innocence made everything hurt even more. I'm not taking her right now, I said, my voice softer. But don't think this is over, Emily. We have a lot to figure out. And I can't be with someone who's betrayed me like this. I walked out of the house, leaving Emily standing there, her sobs echoing in the quiet house. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with my mom, trying to gather my thoughts, but the truth was, nothing made sense. How could Emily, someone I thought I knew so well, do this to me? How could I have missed the signs? I knew I needed to take action, but I wasn't sure where to start. Emily had broken my trust, but there was a bigger issue now. I had to think about Chloe, our daughter, who was caught in the middle of all this. I couldn't let Emily's mistakes affect her future. I called a lawyer the next morning. Robert Chin was one of the best in town, specializing in family law. He listened to my story, looked over the evidence I had, photos, texts, bank statements, and then nodded. You've got a strong case, Robert said, his voice steady. Emotional infidelity is hard to prove, but this evidence is solid. We'll need more though. More? What more could there be? But I trusted Robert, and I followed his advice. I hired a data recovery specialist to dig through Emily's iCloud account, desperate for anything that could confirm what I already knew. What I found was devastating. Messages between Emily and James showed how their relationship had escalated. They had started talking casually after Chloe was born, and it quickly became clear that Emily was emotionally invested in James. She had confided in him about her loneliness, her dissatisfaction with our marriage, and her growing attraction to him. The worst message, the one that shattered whatever hope I had left, read, "I'm trapped, James. Samuel's a good man, but he's not you. I need to wait for the right moment." I read that message over and over again, trying to find some other meaning, some way to excuse what Emily had done. But there was no other interpretation. She had been planning to leave me. She had been waiting for the right time to make her escape, all while pretending to be the loving wife and mother. The pain in my chest was unbearable. But there was no turning back now. I had to protect my daughter. And that meant moving forward with the divorce. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about me, it was about Chloe, and it was about rebuilding our lives after everything had fallen apart. And I was ready to fight for that. The days that followed were a blur of legal appointments, sleepless nights, and a constant ache in my chest. The pain of betrayal was one thing, but the uncertainty of what would come next was another beast entirely. I couldn't stop thinking about Chloe. What kind of world was I going to give her if I stayed stuck in this mess with Emily? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had to fight for my daughter. I met with Robert Chin, my attorney, almost every day during that first week. He was relentless in his pursuit of justice, piecing together every bit of evidence that I'd gathered. He helped me draft the initial documents for the divorce petition and arranged for a temporary custody hearing. "You've got a solid case," Robert would tell me each time we met. "But I'm telling you now, it's going to get ugly. Emily isn't going to give up without a fight. She's going to fight for Chloe, and she'll do whatever she can to paint you as the villain." I had prepared myself for that. I wasn't naive. Emily had always been good at convincing people of her version of the truth. But I knew in my heart that I had the upper hand now. I had proof of the lies, the emotional affair, and the deception. But that didn't make it any easier when the day of the custody hearing finally arrived. I showed up at the courthouse, dressed in a suit that felt too tight and a heart that was too heavy. My hands shook as I held the folder with all the evidence. I wasn't sure what was worse, the idea of losing Chloe, or the reality of what had already been lost. The courtroom was sterile, cold, and intimidating. I sat in the back, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Emily arrived shortly after, looking as composed as ever, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. She sat across from me, her lawyer whispering to her, and I couldn't help but notice how she kept glancing over at me, her face a mask of concern and regret. It was like she was trying to read me, to figure out if I would cave. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the hearing to order. She looked over the documents before her, then turned her gaze to me. "Mr. Hartman, I understand you're seeking primary custody of your daughter, Chloe. Can you explain why you believe that's in her best interest? I stood up, my throat tight. Your Honor, I'm not here to attack my wife. I want to be clear about that. I've always been dedicated to providing for my family. I've done everything I could for my daughter. But the evidence I've gathered shows a pattern of deception. My wife has been emotionally unfaithful, lying to me about where she's been and who she's been with. She's made decisions that have jeopardized our family. And I can't allow that to continue for Chloe's sake. The judge listened intently, her face unreadable. She then turned to Emily's lawyer, who presented their case. Emily's lawyer was well prepared, making her sound like the devoted mother who had been wronged, who was simply misunderstood. He emphasized her role in Chloe's life, the sacrifices she had made, and the deep bond she shared with her daughter. But I wasn't backing down. I knew the truth. I knew the pain Emily had caused, and I wasn't going to let her sweep it under the rug. I couldn't risk Chloe growing up in an environment of lies and deceit. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her blouse. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I regret it deeply. But I love my daughter. I've been her mother since the day she was born. I've been there for every milestone, every first word, every first step. I'm the one who stayed home with her during her first 6 months. Please don't take her away from me. I could feel my heart breaking at her words, even though I knew they were just part of her defense. I could see the pain in her eyes, but I also saw the guilt. The realization that this wasn't just about custody. This was about everything that had been lost, the trust, the love, the foundation of our family. The judge deliberated for a few minutes before looking at both of us. Mrs. Hartman, she said, her voice cold but firm, your actions, while emotional in nature, have demonstrated a clear disregard for the integrity of your marriage and the stability of your home. Mr. Hartman, on the other hand, has provided clear evidence of your behavior and has demonstrated a strong commitment to your daughter's well-being. Given the circumstances, the court grants primary custody of Chloe to Mr. Hartman. Mrs. Hartman will have supervised visits every other weekend until further evaluation can be made regarding her emotional stability and ability to fulfill her parental responsibilities. The words hit me like a freight train. Primary custody. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. I had one, yes, but at what cost? Emily was broken, and so was I. Our family had crumbled, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Emily didn't say a word. She just stood there, looking like she had been hit with a ton of bricks. Her lawyer muttered something under his breath, and they left the courtroom without another word. I sat there for a long time, my mind spinning. The weight of the decision, the finality of it, hung heavy in the air. But despite the pain, despite the shattered pieces of what once was, I knew I had done what was best for Chloe. As I left the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city. I could almost feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. There was a long road ahead, a road that would be full of more pain, more questions, and more uncertainty. But I would face it for Chloe. And this time, I would make sure it was different. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, court dates, and emotional turbulence. While I had one primary custody of Chloe, it didn't feel like a victory. Emily still had her visits, and she seemed determined to regain some form of control over the situation, though the damage was already done. The reality of our separation, of Chloe growing up in 2 homes, was something I couldn't ignore. It felt like we were all living in a fractured world that didn't make sense anymore. I settled into a routine with Chloe. My mom helped out when I had work commitments, and I started to build a new life. I moved into a modest apartment, far from the memories of the house Emily and I had once shared. The apartment was small, but it felt like a fresh start. I painted the walls a light blue, hung up some of Chloe's artwork, and made sure the space was filled with warmth and love. Every night, I would read Chloe her bedtime stories, stories about dinosaurs, princesses, and far-off lands. She loved dinosaurs the most, probably because of their big teeth and loud roars. I loved those moments, when everything felt simple, when it was just me and my daughter, no drama, no betrayal, just a quiet bond that had somehow survived the storm. But Emily's visits were a constant reminder of everything we had lost. The first few weekends were the hardest. Chloe would see Emily, and when she came back, she would be quieter, more distant. I could tell she was confused, torn between the two worlds she now had to navigate. She would sometimes ask where Mommy was, and I would have to answer with the same explanation: Mommy is at a different house, but she loves you very much. As the months passed, the pain of what Emily had done started to settle into something more manageable, numbness perhaps. I still couldn't believe the depth of her betrayal, but the anger and heartbreak began to fade, replaced by something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. But Emily, on the other hand, wasn't adjusting as well as I had hoped. Her job was slipping. She had gone from being an ambitious, driven woman to someone who seemed lost in her own grief and guilt. Her work performance plummeted. She was late to meetings, her reports were incomplete, and she had trouble focusing. It didn't take long before the company let her go. Her career, like our marriage, was crumbling, piece by piece. I watched from the sidelines, my emotions conflicted. I felt some sympathy for her. After all, she had lost a lot. But I also knew she had brought this on herself. She had made a choice, and now she was paying the price. One evening, after Emily had finished her supervised visit with Chloe, she called me. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Samuel," she said, "can we talk? Just for a moment." I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, unsure of what to expect. "Sure, what is it?" I want to try again. Not for us, not for the marriage, but for Chloe. I miss her so much. I miss being her mom. I want to do better. I want to be a better person. Can we try to co-parent without all the anger? I don't know what to do anymore. I feel so lost. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was asking for something I wasn't sure I could give. Could I ever trust her again? Could I ever forget what she had done? And most importantly, did I even want to? "I don't know, Emily," I replied, my voice shaky. "You broke my trust. You broke this family. I'm trying to move on. Chloe deserves better than what we had. She deserves honesty. She deserves peace." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know. And I'm sorry. I truly am." We didn't say much after that. I didn't want to be cruel, but I couldn't offer her anything more. My heart had been shattered too many times. But the hardest part came when Chloe, in her innocent way, started to notice the distance between her mother and me. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "why doesn't Mommy live here anymore?" I froze, my hand halfway to her blanket. I'd been waiting for this question, but I wasn't prepared for it. How do you explain to a 2-year-old that her mother's choices had torn their world apart? "Sometimes, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "people make choices that hurt others. Mommy made some choices that hurt Daddy. So we can't live together anymore." Chloe was quiet for a moment, thinking, before she looked up at me again. "But Mommy loves me, right?" I smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "Yes, Chloe. Mommy loves you very much. She just made some mistakes, but she still loves you." She seemed satisfied with that answer, as children often do, and drifted off to sleep. But I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep this up. How long before Chloe would understand the truth? A few weeks later, Emily reached out again, this time with a more formal request. She wanted to meet, to talk about the custody arrangement, to try and reach an agreement. "I just want to be involved in her life, Samuel. I know I messed up, but I'm her mother. I'm not asking for full custody, just more time with her. I miss her. I need her in my life." Her voice was shaky, desperate. It broke something in me. She wasn't just a broken woman anymore. She was a mother who had lost everything, and now she was trying to piece it all back together. I knew I had to make a decision. It wasn't just about what Emily wanted anymore. It was about Chloe. It was about her future, her happiness, and her emotional well-being. As I sat down to consider my options, I realized one undeniable truth: this wasn't just about Emily. This was about me too. I had to heal. I had to move forward. For Chloe. For me. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't keep dragging the past along with me. It was time to let go. "Fine," I texted Emily back later that night. "We'll meet. But no more lies, Emily. We need to do this for Chloe. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would fight for Chloe's happiness, no matter the cost. And I would make sure she grew up knowing she was loved, no matter what. The weeks that followed were filled with difficult conversations, legal battles, and a slow process of healing. Emily and I began meeting regularly to discuss the custody arrangement, but it was never easy. We both had our scars, our wounds from the betrayal, but we also had one thing in common: Chloe. I knew that if we were going to make this work, if we were going to find some sort of peace, we had to focus on her. Emily had apologized 1,000 times, but no amount of apologies could undo the damage. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to shut her out entirely. Chloe needed her mother, even if I didn't know if I could ever fully trust Emily again. Emily's visits became more regular, and while it wasn't always smooth, Chloe started to adapt to the new routine. She was still young, still at that age where things were simple, but I could see the shift in her when she was with Emily. The closeness was there, and despite the tension I felt in the pit of my stomach every time I handed Chloe over to Emily, I tried to remain civil. I also began to open up more with Chloe about her mother. I wanted her to understand that despite everything that had happened, her mother still loved her. I didn't want Chloe to grow up confused or resentful. I wanted her to feel safe in the love that both Emily and I had for her, even if our paths had diverged. One evening, as I was putting Chloe to bed, she asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, "do you and Mommy love each other?" I sat on the edge of her bed, my heart heavy. "No, baby, we don't love each other the way we used to. But we both love you. And that's what matters most. You're our world, Chloe." She seemed to understand, nodding slowly before curling up under her blanket. The next few months passed with their ups and downs. Emily continued to struggle, not just emotionally but professionally as well. Her new job, though a step down from her previous position, wasn't enough to fill the void she felt. She was distant, often losing herself in the constant cycle of guilt and regret. I could see it in the way she carried herself, in the exhaustion that never seemed to leave her. But there were moments when she'd reach out to me, not for reconciliation, but for advice, for support in navigating the life we had now. I didn't expect it, but I began to offer it, not out of love, but out of a sense of responsibility. I wasn't going to abandon her completely, not when we shared a child. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily was leaving after one of her visits with Chloe, she stopped by the door and looked at me. "Samuel," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I've made a mess of everything, and I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I will always be grateful for what we had. I'll always be thankful for Chloe." Her words were simple, but they meant something. For the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the woman I once loved. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was enough to remind me that even in the midst of all the hurt, we had both changed. "Emily," I said, my voice steady, "we can't go back. But we can move forward. We have to. For Chloe." And that's when I realized that I had reached a place where I could begin to forgive. I wasn't forgiving her for the betrayal or the lies. I was forgiving her for myself, for Chloe. It was the only way I could heal. Days turned into weeks, and I slowly adjusted to life as a single parent. I became more involved with Chloe's school and activities, making sure she knew she had a stable, loving environment. My mom continued to be a huge help, but I started to feel more confident in my own role as both a father and a provider. I also found myself spending more time with Sophie, the woman I'd met a few months earlier. Sophie had been a breath of fresh air. She was patient, kind, and most importantly, she was understanding. She never pushed me to rush into anything, never tried to replace Emily. But over time, I began to open up to her more, letting her into my life and Chloe's. One afternoon, after Chloe's soccer practice, I found myself walking beside Sophie through the park, hand in hand. I had no expectations, no plans. I wasn't looking for love, not yet. But as I watched Chloe run ahead, laughing with her teammates, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was content. I wasn't looking back at the past. I was simply living in the present, embracing the life I was building. Chloe loved Sophie. The two of them had started to form a bond of their own. Sophie was always patient with Chloe, always gentle, and never overstepped. It was a delicate balance, but we were finding our rhythm. A few months later, as Emily continued to struggle, she reached out to me again, this time with a request that caught me off guard. "Samuel," she said over the phone, "I want to start over. Not with you. But with Chloe. I know I've hurt her, but I want to make it right. I want to prove to her that I can be the mother she deserves. I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to try. Can you let me?" I could feel the sincerity in her voice, the weariness that came from years of trying to carry the weight of her mistakes. I paused, thinking about the long road we had traveled, about Chloe's future. "Emily, I can't make that decision for Chloe. But if you're truly ready, then you need to show her through your actions, not just words. She deserves that much." For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like Emily was ready to face the consequences of her choices. And maybe, just maybe, that was a step in the right direction. The journey wasn't over. There were still many difficult conversations ahead, still many challenges to face. But as I stood there with Chloe in my arms, Sophie by my side, I knew one thing for sure: I had created something real, something that would last. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And that was all that mattered.